Hello and welcome back to the Scale Modelling Cafe. My name is Jamie, and in this part I'm going to show you how I painted up all the ancillary bits, the ordnance, the undercarriage, that kind of thing, and prime the model and get it ready for the base coat and the weathering and final finishing. So you can see here what I'm doing is I'm priming the Edward Brassin missiles, the Skyflash and the Sidewinder, and it's a good idea to prime these parts, especially because being resin and with photo etch bits, as you saw on the fin there, it really makes it easier. So here's the Skyflash, and what I'm doing here is I'm just painting the nose of the Skyflash white using MRP white and just building up the colour to a nice opaque finish, and then we'll mask that off in a moment. So with the noses masked, it's out with the MRP medium sea grey, and I'm just going to build that up in light coats. The MRP paint is really thin. It's almost like Alclad really, if you're familiar with that. So it shows up all the detail, which is really good, and that's the advantage of these Brassin missiles, is the level of detail is way over and above what you'll get in the plastic parts. So they're well worth investing in. Obviously there's a fin missing there, because we don't need that. That's going to be mounted in the recesses on the underside of the fuselage. Removing the masking with tweezers, and that will reveal, hopefully, a nice crisp white nose. There we go. The Sidewinder is a little bit different. So the medium sea grey is masked off, and the nose needs to be, well, I was going to say black. It's not quite black. This is a really dark grey. You can see the pin there, and I'm going to use that pin to mount the missiles onto the pylons eventually, right at the end of the project. Very carefully removing the masking tape there. You've got to be careful because they are resin, they are fragile, they could bend, and especially those photo etch fins, which were drilled and pinned for a little bit of extra strength, but they're still really fragile. And actually later on I did actually knock quite a few of them off, which was a bit of a pain. And there we go. That looks really good. So here's the missile finished, deckled, and with a light grey wash just to help pop the details out. A little bit of weathering there. And obviously they are live missiles with the brown stripe. Same for the Sidewinder. And I used the decals that came with the Edward Brassin kit. So maybe not 100% accurate for the British stuff, but pretty good. Now onto the undercarriage. This is the nose undercarriage. And I've added the Edward parts from the Brassin set. Sorry, not Brassin set, the photo etch set. And I'm just priming it with Mr. Surfacer 1200. So here's the main undercarriage leg, one of them. Quite a lot of scratch building on here. So lots of wiring added from lead wire. And I made the springs. And it really goes a long way to just elevate that detail. And again, priming with Mr. Surfacer. Lots of different materials going on. So it just homogenizes, to use a long word. Don't ask me to spell it, please. No idea. Homogenize the part, so it's going to make the base coat a lot easier. It's photo etch used on the undercarriage doors. And again, they were primed. That photo etch really does lift it, and you will see it, that detail, so it's well worth the investment. And here's the nose doors, again, lots of photo etch, much more refinement, and again, well worth the investment using those. Okay, back to the main undercarriage leg, and now for the white, and again using the trusty MRP. The MRP is it's not quite a gloss, but it's a kind of shiny satin finish, which means it's going to take the wash really nicely, no need to varnish or anything like that, and it covers really, really well. You just need to build it up in slow layers, and it really makes that detail pop, that extra detail that we've added. I like to get all these bits and pieces done before the main fun part of the painting and weathering. I just find that once I've done, you know, the favourite bit, the painting and the weathering and everything, I kind of run out of a little bit of mojo. So if I can get all this stuff done, then all I've got to do is at the end of the process is just put it all together, and that's the end of the project. So now for the wash. This is an oil wash made from just various oil brusher paints from Ammo, mixing up a nice tone, not too dark and quite thin. We don't want it to overpower, we just want it to enhance the detail. It's a warm tone, so it's not too cold, and that will complement the white nicely. And here on the nose undercarriage bay doors, it really does lift up that photo etch detail. Works really well. Now for the undercarriage, you'll see there I've painted the shock absorber, for want of a better word, in a chrome silver, and I'm just touching in using capillary action and the brush to help it flow the oil wash into those recessed details. Excuse me. And you can see what a difference that all makes. It really makes that detail pop. So once all that's applied, what we're going to do is just leave that to dry for about 30 minutes or so. You can leave it for longer, and then we'll just clean it up. You could use black, but I do find that is a little bit too harsh. Yes, it's 72nd scale. Yes, you could do with a little bit of contrast there, but I find that this sort of medium browny grey colour really complements the white nicely. Does a good job of bringing out that detail, as you can see there, without being too harsh. And important to capture everything, all the details. Nothing worse than when you come to clean it up, you realise you missed a bit and have to go back. And there we go, all done. Of course, don't forget the wheels. That wash is going to really help to highlight that brake detail there. And that's it, that's that detail all done. Now we're going to clean up the airframe and get ready for the paint. So I've just here got a bit of isopropyl alcohol on a cloth, and I'm just going to wipe away all these fingerprints just to give the paint the best chance possible. You can see I've already painted the canopy, and now we're going to come in with the primer. The primer I'm using is Mr. Surfacer thinned with Mr. Leveling Thinner. It's Mr. Surfacer 1500, so it's nice and fine. And I'm just going to build it up in light layers. It's important to cover up the black. We don't want any sort of pre-shading effect. with that. So even though that was painted on the inside, I did paint the outside as well, just to make sure. So that's going to take a little bit more, just to cover up that black. But nice, light, even coats. Now this aeroplane has got obviously lots of 90-degree corners, lots of detail. So it could be easy to get the air to kind of circulate turbulence and to have a dusty effect. But by using quite a thin mix, I can't tell you the ratio because A, I can't remember, and B, it's going to differ wherever you are in the world for heat, temperature, etc. But it is actually quite a thin mix. And using the levelling thinner as well to help, that is going to help reduce the risk of that turbulent air and getting that slightly rough finish. You can see I've not painted the wheel wells separate. That's all going to be painted at the same time as the airframe, and then what I'll do is I'll mask off the wheel wells and then I'll go in with the white and I'll paint that separately. The air pressure is relatively high, probably about 15 to 18 psi. And I'm just going to, as I said before, just lay it on in nice, light, even coats. Quite often I won't prime, but I have primed here because I do have some resin, I do have some photo etch. And for the same reasons of the missiles and the undercarriage, is it's just going to help when it comes to the base coat get a nice even tone. I did mention in the episode 1 about the ventral strakes. You can see them there, they've been added. The only difference I could see is on the kit in the knacker duct there is an ejector pin mark which is going to be nigh on impossible to remove. Clearly with the resin parts there isn't any. And that really, I think, is the main advantage of using those. They fit okay. They needed a little bit of filler to fare them in. Only a little bit of Mr. Surfacer. But I think they work well. And I definitely choose that option again. Because it is only cheap. They are only cheap. One thing I forgot to do though is those layer vents on the top. I totally forgot that I'd bought some resin replacements. And actually what I did do is I thinned those down. They are really quite thick actually in the kit. So they were thinned down for a better preference. So if you didn't want to go through the expense of buying them, even though there are only a few quid, and the faff of cutting those out and replacing them, you can just do what I did and just thin them. They won't look quite as good, but it is much, much better. I have, as you can see, also added the aerials and the fins. A lot of F-14 modelers will sort of leave the fins separate, especially if they're a separate colour. They do fit well, but I didn't want to take the risk of painting them, fitting them, and then having a gap. So they were glued in. A little bit of Mr. Surfacer here and there where required. And it wouldn't be too hard to mask those off and paint them a separate colour. So you kind of get the idea of how long it'll take to prime a model like this. Clearly it's not quite finished yet. I'm just gonna cut the filming in a second. But you get the idea of how long it'll take. And there it is, all finished and primed. Now, Mr. Surfacer does go down really, really smooth, but I always polish in between coats. It just helps to keep it all smooth. It means that when you come to use the gloss coat, you can use a much thinner gloss mix. It all helps to preserve the detail. I do gloss my models before decaling. I do think it helps. That's just a personal preference. You don't have to if you don't want to. But I do find I do get a better result if I do gloss coat in between, sort of before and after decaling. It works for me. But this is a really, really well worn polishing sponge from Mastercasters. I've had this, oh crumbs, 10 years plus. So it's really, really well worn. But it's super soft actually, and it does a great job of polishing. You can see I'm just being very careful around all those sort of aerials and pitot tubes and whatnot. You have to be quite careful not to knock those off. Easy for me to say. And getting in there, that's where it could be its roughest, I suppose, on the inside of the engine nacelles, where that air is going to start sort of mixing and be a bit turbulent. You could get right in there with a bit of Trizact or micromesh or something like that, but actually it wasn't too bad on this model, so this sanding sponge worked well in those nooks and crannies. Going in there, just running my finger over it just to check we're working. There we go, all nice and smooth. Having a good check there, and we're finished. Okay, now for the metallic areas. So I've put down as a base coat Mr. Surfacer Black. That's not really glossy, and I don't want a really super shiny finish. So it's a nice satin colour, and it's a great undercoat for kind of weathered metal. So I'm using Alclad paints for this. They are my go-to metallics. And for this base coat, I'm using Alclad Steel. At the moment, yeah, it looks a little bit shiny, but I like the steel tone. It's relatively dark. So it's not too bright and shiny. And there is a slight sort of brownish tinge to the tone, which I really, really like. And it's a really good base coat for all kind of exhausts, jet exhausts. I use it on piston engine exhausts as well. And you just get a really nice patina over that sort of satin black. Now we're going to weather down a bit the effect. So what I've got now is some Alclad jet exhaust. It's actually really quite a dark tone. So I'm going to use it very, very sparingly. And I'm just going to mist over the top. And the effect I'm trying to get is more of that burnt tone. So that's the base coat of steel, and then almost like a filter coat of the jet exhaust. Just on its own, the jet exhaust I find just too dark. But this allows the kind of steel tone to shine through. And you can see there the sort of more browny, exhausty tone. And now the next layer is I'm going to post-shade with some Tamiya paint. So this is matte black and hull red. And I'm just going to go in and I'm just going to weather up now these metal areas. I'm going to concentrate around the sort of, as you can see there, around the boundaries. That's going to give a little bit of volume. But you do see I am spraying over the whole area. Because the Tamiya paints are matte, they are extremely thin. It's only about 10% to 15% paint. But that slight matte paint is going to slightly dull the patina, the finish. But it's still going to allow some of the shine to come through. It's quite difficult to explain in words. It's easy to see kind of in the flesh on the model. I've got the advantage that I work in the aviation industry, and exhausts, jet exhausts, that's turboprop and jet, they're not super shiny. They are kind of matte with this kind of a bit of reflectance, and you can see the difference there between the rear, the one at the rear at the top and the one at the front. The difference in sort of shine, if you like, and the difference in colour. This mainly black with a little bit of hull red in it, just gives it, again, adds to that slightly burnt effect. Now the resin exhaust burner cans were painted in exactly the same way, and the only difference there is they just had a black wash just to highlight the detail. I didn't think there's any point sort of stretching the video out too long, so I didn't film that. But they were done at the same time with the same process. So you can just see from that shot how thin that paint is. And it's just a question of slowly building it up. And again, as I say, around the sort of edges, just to build that volume. And if you go back and compare it to the beginning at the start, you can see that different patina that we've got now, that slight shine sort of coming underneath through the matte to give that authentic jet exhaust patina. There we go, that is the end. Oh, I did film it. Here we go. So, I'm just adding a black wash to this. Burner can, I used the 2 closed ones. Now, accuracy experts will be screaming at me, that's the wrong engine. This is a what if, so it's based on the F-14A, and I did use some F-14D bits and pieces, so it is a bit of a Frankenstein, but that wash just highlights the detail. Right, then it was all masked up, and that was actually really quite tricky because there's some really tight curves in there, so it was a mix of using the punch and die set to punch out circles. It was a mix of the Tamiya flexi tape and obviously sort of the traditional kabuki tape. And I'm just going back in with primer here just to cover up that dark sort of overspray. I have polished some of it away, as you can see there, with some very fine sanding sticks. But I don't want any pre-shading effect coming through. So I'm just going back in with some of the primer just to blend that away, so when I come in with the top coat and the base coat, it's not going to be affected by any of the overspray. So you can see there on the underside where I've just started to polish away some of the overspray, and then just going in and filling in. And this is pretty much it, actually. So I'll leave it here at the end of this video. There's a little bit of a preview just on the, I'm just developing this whole sort of how I'm editing it, so I do have a little bit of a preview of what's coming in the next part, which is going to be the last part. And let's see how this works out, see how you like it. Give us your comments, that would be great. So that's into part 4. And then coming up in part 5, which is going to be the last part of this project, I'm going to paint and weather and finish it off. So there's going to be a little bit of base coat action. I'm going to be sanding some of the decals. I completely mess up the oil wash, and I do a bit of oil dot blending, and I make some rusty bits and pieces. So there we go, that's it. So that is what it's going to look like at the end of the next episode. So thank you very much for tuning in. Love to have your comments and feedback, and I'll see you on the next one. Thank you very much.